My husband has a bizarre fetish, role-playing, and in his twisted scripts, I'm always cast as the devoted wife he casts aside. Today, he's the ruthless tycoon who falls for the nanny. Tomorrow, he's the brilliant professor infatuated with his student. Each time he makes me sign a divorce agreement, only to tear it up with a laugh the next day. Darling, he'd say, it's just a game. That is, until my mother was in a car accident and needed $50,000 for emergency surgery. On that day, he was role-playing a bankrupt loser. I'm broke, darling, completely penniless. Where would I get the money to save your mother? I watched my mother take her last breath. On the day of her funeral, he showed up with a beautiful young college student on his arm. Honey, I've fallen in love with my student. Let's get a divorce. Frank pulled a document from his briefcase and handed it to me. This time, I didn't wait for him to tear it up. A fresh divorce agreement. His signature was already on it. The game again. He was starting the game again. Right here, at my mother's wake. Just after I'd lost the only family I had left. I stared at him, at that handsome face I once adored. For the past 3 years, every time he produced one of these agreements, I would play my part. I'd cry, I'd scream, I'd demand to know why. And then he'd laugh, rip up the paper, and pull me into his arms, cooing that it was all just for fun. He called it spicing things up, a way to keep the magic alive. And I believed him. But now, my mother was lying in a coffin just a few feet away. Before she died, she had gripped my hand, her eyes fixed on the door, waiting. She was waiting for the son-in-law she'd always treated as her own to come and see her one last time. He never came. I knelt before her coffin and pressed my forehead to the cold floor in a final, silent goodbye. Then I stood and took the pen from Frank's hand. There were no tears, no hysterics. As he watched, I wrote my name, each stroke deliberate and firm. There, it's done. Frank froze. The breakdown, the screaming fit he was expecting, never came. The woman standing before him was unnervingly calm. Clara, what kind of trick is this? He frowned, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. The student, Mia, sensed something was wrong too. Her hand tightened on his arm. Professor Vance, do you think she's just in shock? I ignored them. I picked up the second signed copy of the agreement, folded it neatly, and placed it in my purse. Frank, I said, looking him straight in the eye, my voice even and clear. The game is over. The next morning, I went to the courthouse. I filed the petition for divorce, along with the legally signed agreement. The clerk glanced from the document to my face, then processed the paperwork with bureaucratic indifference. I pulled out my phone. The screen was flooded with missed calls and texts from Frank. Clara, have you had your little tantrum yet? Get home now. I've torn up the agreement. We can pretend this never happened. How dare you hang up on me? Who do you think you are? The last one had arrived half an hour ago. If you're not back by tonight, don't ever bother coming back at all. I blocked his number. I rented a small apartment, and after a bit of cleaning, I started my job search. After Frank and I got married, he'd convinced me to quit my job to be a full-time housewife, a willing participant in his endless, tedious role-playing games. He said he loved me to his very core, and that's why he wanted to experience the thrill of falling in love with me over and over again in different scenarios. He insisted the cruel, heartless men who cast their wives aside in his games weren't the real him. It was just acting. How ridiculous that sounds now. Maybe he was never acting at all. Maybe those cold, selfish, cruel masks were his true face. The court summons reached Frank quickly. I was in the middle of a job interview when his call came through. Clara, are you out of your goddamn mind? You actually took me to court? I calmly walked to the end of the hallway. Frank, we both signed the divorce agreement. The legal filing is just a formality to speed things up. Formality? Let me tell you something. This divorce is not happening. Frank, my mother is dead, I said, cutting him off. There was a brief silence on the other end. I know, he said, his voice turning cold, but that was her fate. You can't take your anger out on me. A game is a game, and reality is reality. Can't you even tell the difference? You're the one who can't tell the difference anymore.